No. Oops. That's okay. So I don't know if this is working. So I'm not an educator. I'm not a game designer. I'm not any of those things that almost everybody else in this room is. I'm a cognitive scientist. I try to figure out how the mind works. And what I'm going to give you here is a perspective of a cognitive scientist and a humanities professional on what I think as the future of learning, right? And so this is not really, think of it as fiction science. So it'll be science in the future, it's fiction right now. Oh, let's see, that's not the way. So the future of learning, as almost everybody here might agree, is some kind of open learning, right? And I say open learning and not open education because I think that education, and I'm trying to be deliberately provocative, education is dead, right? If you went to Cambridge or Oxford 1,000 years ago, or for that matter, if somebody from Cambridge and Oxford from 1,000 years ago came now, and they went and looked for the blacksmith or the carpenter or the ox herder, you're not going to find that person. But if they went and looked for the professor, they would still do that, right? So education is actually one of the oldest living professions, which is why I think it's, what we think of as education is, I think, dying. It's going to be radically different, and it'll be different in ways that are significantly informed by how our minds and brains work, right? So there's a lot of interesting stuff that you must have heard about technology. I think technology is great, but ultimately it's about people. We are biological organisms. We eat and drink and see and hear. So unless you understand how that works, you're not going to figure out how to get people to learn. So what does that mean? What is open learning? Right? So again, hypothetically, anything, anywhere, anytime, anyone should be able to learn whatever you want. But how do you get that? Right? So how do you achieve open learning? And there are two meanings of openness. And many, many speakers here have talked about one of them, which is open access. Everybody gets in. You learn at your own convenience. You learn it on your tablet. You learn it on your iPhone screen, though most people in India at least cannot have iPhones. You can learn it at night, day. You could be a working professional, any of those things. So that's one notion of openness, right? Now that's very important. It democratizes education. But that's not the only notion of openness that we should be thinking about. In this future of radical reform of education, which, as I said, is dying, so let's just call it learning, there's another notion of openness which is exceptionally important, which most people don't seem to think about, which is what I call open to everything, right? Open in scope. So what do I mean by that? If you think about Galileo inventing his telescope, what the telescope does is it changes your view of knowledge from what was taught to you for 1,000+ years at that time to something new. Right? He discovered the moons around Jupiter, which was one of the first demonstrations that there are planetary objects that do not revolve around the Earth. So, what is current education? Very simplistic, but I don't think particularly wrong view is you start with the universe and you compress that into the school. You compress the school into the classroom, and you compress the classroom into a book. Right? This is roughly speaking the way education has been done, especially since the invention of the mass printed book. I don't think this is that interesting. It's great for compression. It's very bad for decompression. As most of you have talked about how applications don't work. We don't know how to get back to the world from out of the book. You compress the universe into a book, but you don't know what to do with it. It comes from a time of very steep storage costs, Knowledge is scarce, so it's a mentality of zero memory, right? Memory is now pretty much free. So what do you do? So I think that the one place which I would like to concentrate on in this reevaluation of learning is on books. Not games, not better tests and so on. Books have been around for a very long time, and unless we figure out how to do books better, we're not going to figure out how to do learning better. Right? So what should a book be? Now there's a very famous poem by William Blake, right? To see a world in a grain of sand, add and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour, right? So this is from his Auguries of Innocence. So this is his idea of what one should be able to do. This is open learning anytime, anywhere. How do you do this? So books should be more like people, which is to say they should be adaptive, they should be multisensory, they should be responsive. That's what people are. People are sensory beings. We are not just words. So somebody, I think there's that famous Ken Robinson TED Talk, which many of you might have heard, says that academic professors, people like me, are people whose, to them, bodies are just transport vehicles for their brains. Well, actually, human beings, including academic professors, are not just brains being transported around in bodies. Our bodies actually make us the kind of beings that we are. If we were not visual animals, we will also not be thinking animals. So books should be similar. It shouldn't just be text on paper. Right? So I don't know, how many of you recognize this picture and know the scene behind this? You get 10 extra points in my exam. That's Socrates' death. I think Socrates was mentioned once right? So he's drinking his hemlock right there. Right? So just imagine a Socratic book, right? Important, open in every sense of that term, right? So it should be public, it should be dynamic, it should be open to doubt. So again, the previous speaker mentioned how research is going to be more open and dynamic. So being wrong is not necessarily a bad thing. Currently, if you want to get yourself published in peer-reviewed journals and books, you want to get it right, or at least as right as possible. But maybe that's not a big deal. Again, memory is cheap. So we don't need fixed entities anymore. Okay? So imagine your own handheld Socrates, right? Your personal daemon. So if you have read Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, you know that people walk around with these externalized souls. So just imagine a really fancy, I don't know, iPhone 750 or something like that, right? Which you can just walk around with, and which will actually be your, think about it as a blend of your guru and your slave. I don't know if that will really work, but that's what really you want, is something that you can carry around with you, which condenses the wisdom of humanity into a easily accessible entity, right? And that's really what you should be doing, building books that are like your sense organs. So they should be qualitative, they should have hypermedia, meaning that there are many, many different kinds of media. They should be dynamic, they should be embedded. It should help you zoom in and out of the universe at will, right? So I just downloaded an app called Snapseed onto my iPad. Snapseed is a great app, and it's not that hard to build. I know the person who built it. Which is, I should be able to just snap a picture of a leaf and it'll tell me what kind of leaf it is. Now imagine the kind of books you could build around that app. You can build a biology textbook that if you are sitting here in Delhi, every single picture and illustration in that book should be a species that is found within a kilometer of where I'm standing. It's not that hard to build anymore, which means that I should therefore, the exercises in that book should tell me, go to that tree. You can even geotag that tree, and therefore you can say, go here, go take a picture of that tree, see what comes up, and then ask you questions right in there. You can answer those questions, store it back into the book. Your teacher gets to see what you're doing. That's the kind of stuff that we should be. The technology is there, it's not that far away, but it requires interaction between academics, technology,